Okay, we can start now. Maybe you could begin by telling us your name and where you come from and a little bit about your family's situation before the war.
My name is Bart Stern. Home I was known as Beru or Bart Stern. I come from a town called Uzhhorod, or also known in Hungarian Ungvar, which is in Czechoslovakia or presently in Carpato, Russia. My father and my grandfather, to the best of my knowledge, they lived in the region for about 600 years. At that time it was part of Austrian-Hungarian monarchy, and before that, it's known well to history. He was a businessman and a benefactor who lived in the Jewish community and also in the non-Jewish community for his great honesty and industry, industriousness. He was honorary mayor and was president of the Jewish community and a hardworking man. We were 7 children, and 5 besides the 7 were adopted children. If not for the war, I would have probably never known that they are not my own brothers and sisters. As it was common in those days, a little boy of the age of 2.5, 3 went to cheder, learned alphabets. So when it came time to go to secular school, obviously we were advanced to the rest of the population because we already knew the routine of the alphabets, which we adopted obviously immediately to the ABC. And so grammar was easier for us, and also writing and reading. We had all that head start from the cheder. Things were going very well. We were living under Czech. I was born when it was Czechoslovakia, and it was a very fine democratic system. And the Czechs who came to occupy our part of town in 1918, which was before I was born, they were very fine people and had great respect from the people in our community. And of course, at the age of 6, we went to Czech schools and we learned Czech. We could communicate with them. We spoke home Yiddish. Mm-hmm. And in the welfare homes, it was customary to have a German governess. We spoke German as well. And of course, Hebrew we learned in cheder. And Hungarian was spoken in the street. And also Ruthenian, which is a dialect of Russian. Things went fine, and then came 38 mobilization. We started just before Roshon at 38. And shortly after, the Munich agreement with Chamberlain Daladier has partitioned Czechoslovakia to pacify Hitler. And I remember the slogans were, we did all this to have peace for eternity. Of course, it's not so. And this obviously worries me today also with Israel when I hear that they say that give this to the Arabs, that to the Arabs, and there will be peace.
How old were you at that time in 1938?
12 years old. Actually, not even 12.
What were your feelings at that time? Do you remember?
Yes, it was a very strange feeling because the Jews from Sudeten, Germany, the German-speaking part of Czechoslovakia, ran away from there in fear of German occupation and came to our town. Like we had suddenly doubled our occupants in our house by taking in these refugees. And I was worried if these people who have been that solidly established in their area there have to run away and to sleep in substandard quarters anywhere they could find refuge, what could happen to us? But we somehow got used to that a little while later. But as things progressed further, and the actual occupation, Hungarian occupation, took place in November 10, if I'm not mistaken. It was just shortly after my birthday. At that point, we were very worried because the occupying army who moved in, they were very primitive soldiers and very primitive gendarmerie. Where most of them couldn't even read nor write. And if they had an occasion to plunder on a small scale, and the community was successful in intervening in that, but the fear existed. And we heard it from the elders who pointed out to the fact that they have done that before. I was too young to comprehend too much of it. Then shortly thereafter came, I don't know how short, I think about a couple of years later, that all the ex-Czech citizens who were nationalized, but who were actually became Czech citizens, but who were originally from Poland, were to be deported. Then we already started getting a more serious fear that things are nothing much worse, because the Jews were deported and never anybody has come back from them. So this is when the situation started getting progressively worse. And then they entered the so-called Jewish law, where only certain professions Jews could stay in. Monopolies were taken away, licenses, and businesses were confiscated. That we started to feel that it's getting applicable to everybody, or soon. There were already talks of starting to thinking to leave. There was nowhere to go, or the Jew could go. It wasn't that simple to pick oneself up and go, because like in our household, we were at that time about 20 more people. But matter of fact, one of my brothers succeeded in 1939 to go to England. So between the three of my father's brothers, each sent one of their child away to England. England was considered a country where this could not happen. And they were, I can't even recall all the various laws which existed, like the Jews were taken out of the army, even officers who have been in the army for a long time. They were put into forced labor camps. And the youth, instead of going to the military training which existed for others, there was kind of a work detachment group which they were doing on a local level work with a yellow ribbon on the arm, which was the forerunner of the Yellow Star. Matter of fact, my Melamed, my teacher in Cheder, at that point, at that time I was no longer in Cheder, I was already in a semi-yeshiva. He said, this is what is the forerunner of a Yellow Star. We didn't even know what he's talking, we thought he's crazy. But this yellow ribbon, which existed I think since 1941 already, was the forerunner of the Yellow Star. And this is how it has become more and more embroiled. And it was not so unusual neither that a Jew was asked to leave a certain house, because it was confiscated for military purposes or for state purposes. And the businesses were taken away with a normal procedure.
That happened to your father?
Yes, it happened to him. It was a false situation. He was the longest one who could maintain a distillery. Everybody already lost it, but he had to go every month to Budapest, and he got it, because I wish it would have not been so good. It would have been more realistic to the situation. But we saw somehow that we are in a better position than others. Mm-hmm. Yes, it happened to us as well, of course.
When you think about, if I were to ask you, what is the one thing that stands out most in your mind of that period, is there something that occurs to you?
I mean, that particular period, you mean between the Hungarian occupation and the Germans marching in.
Yes, or even more broadly speaking of all
Yeah, I mean,
those
at
years.
that time it was, of course, the biggest shock, which was one of the first big shocks, was the fact that in 1939, when Poland was occupied, and the Polish Jews who succeeded getting across the border came with horror stories, and they were mostly very similar to Jews who said, "Come on, this is just Polish propaganda from the Polish Jews. I mean, this couldn't happen here. You know, we lived here in this area for 600, 700, 800 years. This is civilized people. Poland, they're murderers, they're cannibals." And these were very reliable. Some of them were literally saintly people, these big rabbis, who told us this. And this was one of the biggest shocks. These people came over. From what we could see, they were almost already then walking skeletons, because they had been hiding in the forest and in the mountains for weeks without food. Of course, some of these very religious Jews, they did not eat because there was not available kosher food. So this was one of the biggest tragic shocks.
By shock, you mean to not know whether to believe your rabbis or the Polish Jews?
Not only the rabbi. I mean, some of the Polish Jews, they all told the same story, but we didn't want to believe it. Mm-hmm. I mean, but the people who said it in our community, who heard it, they didn't want to be panicked by it. Many of them denied it. They said, "Listen, this couldn't be true what they're telling us. We already heard of having been hundreds of thousands being killed by the Poles and by the Ukrainians. We didn't want to believe it. We didn't think it's possible." These were the first one of the shocks. They were quite massive. And then, of course, later, when they deported all the Jews of Polish origin who had citizenship, this was denied, and they were taken. They were supposedly sent to work camps, but nobody ever heard of them. I think only about 6, 7 months later, there was a child from a neighboring town who succeeded to survive, who told the story. He was a child. Even that was hard to believe. It was just difficult. Nobody even could comprehend that this is possible to happen. And so, I mean, even the propagandas which there was a paper in Hungary similar to the Stürmer. Was belittled, saying that it's only just a matter of a few crackpots who put out this paper. They probably don't even have a circulation. It only was for buying it at Jews just to see what it is in it. These things were totally unacceptable to the Jewish thinking, because the Jew was not a killer nor a murderer. Mm-hmm. He couldn't think that our neighbors could do that. Or when we heard that some of our neighbors' sons who were in the army and who went to the SS, the German army, because Hungary was an Axis, was refused. We said, "Oh, no, not that nice liar. She wouldn't do that. He was a lovely kid. He used to play with me. He used to come to turn on the fire for our Shabbos. He would love to have our challah." It was just not possible to accept it. He couldn't believe such dehumanization of these people.
How do you feel about that now?
You see how I feel now. The question I'm always asked by my non-Jewish friends: do I hate the Germans? I don't hate, because what am I going to accomplish by hating the Germans? I'm going to eat myself up. They don't get hurt by it. But I'm rational about it. I won't buy a German car or a German goods. Even if I have the desire to buy a foreign car, I will rather buy it from a country which is a more humane country, has been friendlier to our people. But hate, I don't have. Today, obviously, I am not a believer that it could happen. I can very well imagine, and I hope it's never happening, that Jackson could entice any blacks in any town or in the country to burn down half of America. I don't think it's not possible. It's very well possible. How I feel, I tell you, maybe I console myself wrongly. I think that it's not going to be only the Jews who are going to be victims, but the rest of America and the rest of the world. So it's not only a Jewish problem. Matter of fact, I think it's a Gentile problem. This is what I believe.
Can you tell me about I assume that you were at some point separated from your family.
Yeah, I mean, what happened is that middle of, I'm not sure of the date, I think it was end of March or beginning of April of 44 when the Germans marched in. It's interesting that you asked the question before. 2 weeks before the Germans marched in, an uncle of mine, my father's oldest brother, had succeeded getting his visa to go to Palestine. He left behind property, businesses, and children, and he and my aunt went to Palestine. Maybe more, I think about 4 weeks prior. But 2 weeks prior to the German marching in our hometown was Purim, and in our house, an occasion like that was a big gathering. And in my house, they were usually more poor than the rich. And Purim is important to get drunk to the extent that one should not be able to differentiate between Haman and then at Mordechai. There was a man who was very drunk. He, matter of fact, was so drunk that he was on the porch. He lied under the table that nobody should walk over him. And he told the whole thing, what unfortunately happened a few weeks later. Of course, he was told that Haskell is a shicker, a drunk. Paid no attention to it. He literally wrote the whole scenario, what happened from the minute the Germans marched in until later.
How did he do that? We
don't know. I mean, even today, there are 4 people who still remember that story. I mean, out of hundreds who were in the house, the 4 who survived to remember the story. He knew it. I mean, I know the Talmud says if you drink wine, the secrets come out. And it was considered crazy. Mm-hmm. I think there was 1 or 2 people somehow who gave some credence to it. But when it happened, then we realized, sure enough, this is how it happened. The Germans marched in. Immediately, the drummers and the posters said that Jews are not allowed to go out until further notice. And there were stronger and stricter Jewish laws constantly, because actually since 1938 on, the Jewish laws have been enforced every day with some kind of a new restriction. But at that point, when the Germans marched in, there was a law that you're not allowed to go out before such and such an hour in the morning, nor after such and such hour in the evening or the afternoon. And a few weeks later, there came out the law. The laws could change almost daily or hourly. That we're not allowed to go out at all until further notice. And this is where they started to take the Jews into the ghettos. I mean, my hometown had a sum total with the surrounded areas, 25,000 Jews. So we're not talking about the same kind of ghettos as I understand it was in Poland. But there were 2 locations. One was a big brick factory. Brick factories those days used to be very big, and they did not have equipment. They had to be dried in the sun. I would say in the brick factory must have been about 15,000 Jews. In the lumber yard, which is ironic, with our garden was only 1 wooden fence with other ghetto. There were about 10,000 Jews. The dehumanization process came very fast. There were open spaces. A little bit of lumber we found. The lumber yard, one could make some kind of a small divisions or latrines with it. The first 2 days, somebody had to stand like that with a sheet so that somebody can go to the latrine, and not to do it in publicly, like the gypsies. And there was no food. And it was very, very difficult. And in that there, suddenly one day they came and they started to count people, taking them to the railroad. This is how the deportation started. There were some who said this is only to relocation for work. And these are the processes which everybody knows, that were hunted into railroad cars. And what was the most shocking of all, used to hear that from older people, I mean, when I was a kid, how come that they didn't make an effort to help us, to bring us something? This is where the people lived side by side for centuries. As a matter of fact, we had such wonderful Gentile neighbors who, they always used to say to us as kids, if not for your father or your uncle, we would have not survived, because we would have lost our farm or our business. These were all fine people. And what hurt us the most, there was a peasant boy whose son was so bright that my parents made every effort he should go to university to become a physician, and he did. He told me after the war he was afraid to do something because they considered him anyway as a Jew lover. He could have sent somebody, or he could have sent me somebody something. Nobody made an effort, and it was some kind. We were really lost, but not to despair. And I remember on the way to the railroad station, the gendarmeries were called in from all other areas. To describe you, a gendarme, a Hungarian gendarme, he was an illiterate animal in uniform with a big top hat with feathers in it, like a cock. And all they could do is just, hurry up, bloody Jew, I kill you, hurry up, hurry up. Still, when we got to the railroad station, before we even started we heard it in the railroad cars, we sang songs of hope. I mean, I don't know who started it or what started, but I don't know how many people were choking with emotion and tried to defy them. But there was really, in all that desperation, we were. The first thing when they took away even something they thought it's overweight or more than the weight is, what could the Jew take? Nothing but his belongings. But everybody held on under his shirt, his tefillin and his tallis. Interesting enough that even the not so religious, who everybody had a tallis and tefillin, held on to the tallis and tefillin. The trip in the railroad car, I don't know how to describe it, because truthfully, if I would try to fully relive it, and what has happened, I'd probably go crazy here. I mean, a railroad car, I don't know. Last week we were in Colorado. We watched railroad cars to go. So I told my wife, 4 or 5 of the railroad cars home had the same cubic footage as one of these railroad cars which we saw on the Rio Grande. They were small cars, and they would herd in anywhere between 120 people. But there, in that railroad car, they locked it. There was only just a little bit of an opening. We used to be for cattle or for grain. And we had to put barbed wire. We didn't know what's happening. We thought that they will have other cars, but it would be water or... And this was the transportation. I mean, we traveled... Let's see, we were herded into the cars on Tuesday afternoon. It was Tuesday night, Wednesday, Thursday, and we arrived Friday in Birkenau. And in these railroad cars, there were suicides. It was interesting to know that.
Can you tell me?
The first suicides were the converts, because they were walking around with big crosses thinking that nothing can happen to them. And they ran to the priest, and the priest, of course, kicked them out because they didn't care. I'm trying to even defend the priest who didn't help, because they were probably told, don't defend the converts. They were so well organized that they were the first suicide. They had cyanide and other things thrown into their clothes, and it was a very difficult situation for them. Here in the community for the last 5 or whatever years, they snubbed at the Jew because they are no longer one. And here suddenly they were so defeated, so they just couldn't take it. There was no hope. I mean, they didn't hold on to tefillin under their shirt. So they were the first victim of suicide. And then the more assimilated Jews who couldn't believe that this could happen to them because they had the lawyer, the doctor, they had all very important clients, Gentiles, who had the power to do something. They didn't. So needless to say that, being in this railroad car, I mean, the one we were in, was hardly any space to sit down. But if you sat down, you didn't have a chance to get up because it was so crowded. And of course, there was all the bundles. Everybody had a bundle. And here it is died. Well, there were some people who said, okay, at least let some use to sit down on them, or something. I mean, there was such mixed feelings, and there were some rabbis or knowledgeable people who said that we do eat with them. It was a very, what I have all seen during my whole life, childhood, the dibuk and all that here was happening there in any half hour. Mm-hmm. It was a very terrible scene. And there were some who just went berserk.
What does that mean?
They went crazy. There was a woman who just tore her hair out. Mm. And can you imagine, it was not open, or the people did take care of their needs, do it in their pants. It was starting, the stench was getting the second, the third, and actually the next day was already terrible. No water. No water. And really, nobody believed that what's happening. I remember when we arrived Friday morning to Birkenau, which was just a stone's throw from the crematoria. There we smelled stench of burning of flesh and bones. And then my two older brothers said one to another, well, this is what we heard on the radio. See, actually, I don't remember exactly how much before the Germans marched in, or it was during the time the Germans marched in, every Jew had to give up their radio. Of course, in America, nobody could understand it. To have a radio, which was a big thing to have, maybe like a radar today on your roof, you had to register it with the government. So, as a buyer, you registered it, the seller, the store registered it. And every Jew had to give up his radio. So in our house, somehow, one was, which I only found out later, that was in a very deep basement, and my brothers would go down there under cover of blankets, would listen to it. So evidently that one of these broadcasts were abroad, they heard about burning in Auschwitz. You couldn't tell that to anybody, because if one would find out that one listened to radio, this in itself was already sentenced to death. So, but there when we came to Auschwitz, and then I realized that this is what they have heard on the radio. The scene, what happened there is impossible for me to describe, even if I would have a better vocabulary or a better memory. We stood there, I don't know how many hours. We smelled it, the burning flesh and bone. And suddenly, we hear barking dogs and doors slamming open. Because the doors were half as wide as a whole, or a third as wide as the whole car. And people just fell out on both sides. Those who were on the sides, draus, draus, draus. And those Germans, they have voices like shackles. It's terrible. And those who were still in had to push others out. Those who couldn't come out, we were sending a few people to drag them out. Like in our car, there must have been, I don't know, 10, 15 dead. Maybe about 20 who didn't care or couldn't move. Mm-hmm. And those who could stand up, we stood there quite a bit in line until we had to line up. And there we came to facing high-ranking German officers, very elegantly dressed, beautiful. They could have been guards in Buckingham Palace, white gloves. Of course, later we knew that the headman was Mengele, and they were there all commanding us to go on and right and left, right and left, right and left. Of course, we found out, obviously, we could figure that out, that the people who went on the left side, they were always the old ones, the women with children, that they are not going to be sent anywhere but to be killed. The ones on the right, of course, we were later on sent to delousing station, what they called it, and shaving, and to be sent to commandos to work. Very ironic. We were already naked, just to be let into the shower rooms. But 2 years before, we got a couple of postcards sent from a cousin who was in Auschwitz. This was a kind of a camouflage. This was called the Älteste Rat der Juden, the oldest council of the Jews. And there was, the card came through Berlin. It said Auschwitz Birkenau. So we asked, is this Auschwitz Birkenau? They said, yeah, this is Birkenau. And there we meet. So we say, do you know Edith Lorber? She says, yes, that's me. So we asked her, what happened to those people? She said, the chimney. So obviously we really realized. So we told her who we are, but it didn't matter to her. I guess she's the one who survived, lived in Israel. And only once did I talk with her after about 15 attempts. And I said, what did you feel? She says, what could I tell you anything? Do you think I felt like to talk about it? She had already been there for almost 4 years. They came from Slovakia. And this is how we knew what we smelled and where these other people went. Of course, I had either whether it was this same night or the following night. This I'm not sure anymore. We were in the barracks. First we came to the barracks, when we went through this delousing, and we heard some little bit what we heard from the so-called liquidation commando. This is where my cousin was working. We did not know whether when we go into the shower rooms it means for us as well, but we somehow realized it's not, because we were chosen among the healthy ones. And in that 1 hour happened more shame that one could find in the most immoral society in a lifetime. Fathers and sons and daughters and mothers were all naked, the whole body shaven. And this in itself was a terrible destroying effect. I don't even know whether the word dehumanizing is describing it. And then when we came out of these showers, we stood around there for a long time before we were even assigned clothes. Clothes was a uniform, or a semblance of a uniform. A short guy could get a long one, a guy a short one, and had to hope that he finds immediately next neighbor who he could exchange it with. This was the uniform. Then we were herded into a barrack. I don't know, but I understood it was upon a time horse stables or something of the kind, but they had fairly newly established shelving in that barrack that we were in, because this was the newer barrack. I don't know if it had 10 feet high. They might have been, I think it was 3 shelves. So one would sleep on the bottom and on the second and the third layer. Not enough to crawl in, but not to sit up. These were our sleeping quarters. They came in the food, which later on didn't smell so bad, but the first few days it seemed like it was smelling like garbage. And nobody wanted to eat the trafe. It was trafe and nobody wanted to eat it. We were amazed that people we thought are not so religious would eat it. They didn't want to eat it either, it was trafe. Until the learned man came and said, listen, your duty is to save your life and to defy the Germans. Don't let's give in. Don't let them accomplish victory sooner. And this was in the barracks. So this first night, the second night, we were told not to dare getting out of the barracks until a siren is called. And whatever, we had to take care of our needs. In a barrack like that, I don't know, could be anywhere between 400, 500, 600 people or more. There was a sawed-off metal drum which was to take care of our needs. And I heard one night a lot of screams. This I don't know whether it was first or second night. Because these transports were going on for years before we arrived. Mm-hmm. I heard some terrible screams. Children's screams. Little voices. And I ventured out and I saw there was maybe 50, 60, 70 yards from our barrack, trenches. And these trenches were lit. There was lights coming up from the trenches. And here were nurses, German nurses in white, nice uniform aprons, and a Red Cross sign on their head. I don't know what you call it, like a head cover. Mm-hmm. And the kids were thrilled by looking into the trenches with light. And then when they were up to the very end of the trench, the nurses held hands and they just pushed in the children. And these children were screaming. So I came back to the barrack and I was trying to tell it to my brothers. They said, you did go out? Are you crazy? The sentries will shoot you. I mean, at that time we weren't at so much of area of the sentry. We were told there were barbed wire and sentries. I don't know how many yards apart. The station was pretty high and there were searchlights. So they said, be quiet, because if somebody finds out that you moved out of the barracks. So there's something I couldn't even tell. And even if we would have known, or everybody would have known, what could they have done? Yet, nothing in our hands, no ammunition. So, I mean, this is what my brother's reason is. This is not going to do you any good. There's no chance to escape here. We're in Polish territory. At that time, before they found out that we were in Polish territory, and we knew that on the Polacks one cannot count. Matter of fact, I think the Poles and the Ukrainians were even worse than the Germans. The Germans got orders to kill us or to destroy us. The Polacks did it for the love of it. The Ukrainians were even worse. So at that point we really started feeling the helplessness, impossibility. I mean, we are, as a kid I never felt in my life anything like it. I mean, here we see children are being burned, our parents, brothers and sisters on the other side being burned. I mean, it was an impossible situation. So, when they started to call groups of people to be shipped to another area, they always made it a point to break our brothers. At that point we were 3 brothers together. We did not admit that we are brothers, that we should be able to stay together. We succeeded for 4 days to stay together. And in Birkenau, when we left Birkenau to Auschwitz, it was one of the strongest pouring days. Even a monsoon in India, I didn't experience anything like it. We stood in that heavy rain for about 5 hours. And in that rain, we were marched into Auschwitz. We came to Auschwitz when they started giving out the numbers. As you can see, my number is A4133. We were one of the first of the Hungarian groups. because the Polish group, they used up without the initials in advance, and then they started out with us. And there you had to give a name as well on the card system, because the Germans were very methodical. Oh no, just like as good as they built Mercedes-Benz, they do have a very good methodical system. And they made it sure that no Jew will escape, and this we were told by many of the SS and Gestapo. No Jew will ever escape. Should one succeed to attempt, for every one escaped Jew will be 100,000 slaughtered. This was the logo, the slogan. And there we were actually divided pretty much, the three brothers. But somehow there were too many Sterns. So one was immediately torn away from there, from one of my brothers. So we only remained two. And from there, I was sent into a coal mine. Of course, Auschwitz was in Poland. We were sent into Jaworzno, a town, where the civilian working population, Poles or Volksdeutsche, were the most primitive people I've met. And they were our foremen, they were actually our bosses. They were so primitive that the Volksdeutsche, which is a kind of a not a blue-blooded German from Germany, but a German from Poland, he couldn't read the paper, and he would bring me to the evening. In a few minutes to translate him what the article meant. I was always hoping to get something for it, which I found out later I was lucky, because most who did that, they were actually killed by that Volksdeutsche himself, with the fear that somebody, the person might say that he was translating the articles. So my guy must have been a very nice guy. And these people would always help the Gestapo and the SS to be a little bit harsher. Maybe it was to prove that they are tough guys. Maybe you would get once a month an exchange of a shirt for the last month's shirt. If the shirt was good, we would then give this shirt to one of the civilian workers or the Volksdeutsche, and he would give for that piece of bread or a potato or something like that. Sometime he promised it and he never brought it. And these guys always used to say, no, one of you is going to come out alive from here. There was a hopeless situation. I don't know how to describe it. In this coal mine, and this was one of the greatest stupidities. We wanted to consider ourselves a good elite group, and they were promising bonuses. Next little version, the Germans. So we were so stupid, and of course there were also other voices in the camps who said, "Don't do that." So we came down to the shaft, the coal mine, which could have been anywhere. I don't know. There's no statistics to that. Could have been 400 yards, 600 yards deep down. It is like a little city, rows divided, and when it's blasted out, and they build it around the coal mine, and the little railroad cars you fill up with the coal. We would get 10 or 12 numbers, which we had to fill so many cars. The shovel was as wide as I have never seen anywhere, in any coal mine, American or anywhere else, after as wide a shovel, with a short handle so that we should fill it up. I don't have to tell you that the heavier the shovel is, the more weight it took. And I was in a mine which was already exhausted before the war, but with cheap Jewish labor, and with the war effort going on, it was worth their while to mine for that coal. So we thought that we are going to fill the 10 or 12 lorries. We'll get a bonus and we'll get shorter working hours. We were fools. From then on we got 14, 16. You bloody damn dog-beaten horse, Jews, and all kind of words like that. You can do better just for a little dog bone. You're going to do it without it. And this became, and so that every day more and more died than before. We used to take home many dead bodies with us because we had to take them back to the camp. Home, I call camp. We had to account for them. There were a few times when Polish prisoners, who were our foremen, when they disappeared from the camp, they decimated every tent in the camp. For a Polak who disappeared, not one of us. So we took home, we had to take back the dead bodies. I mean, take back, I mean, if you think that we take back, put them on a car or what. When we left work, we were working the second shift. We left camp about 12 o'clock, arrived at the coal mine station about 1:30. We got back home about 2 in the camp, about 2 in the morning. For this was a combination of walking and railroad ride. This is just on the side. We walked through every day. Forget the nighttime walk back because people were sleeping. The same 35 or 40 villages. Sometimes even now I can remember for which house was expecting bigger rocks. After Auschwitz, I went back to these villages in Russian uniform, and I asked them whether they remember something. Not one miserable Polak was admitting to the fact.
What did you do then?
I hate to say, but what we did after Auschwitz, I mean, at that point no longer, but before, I was liberated by the Russians, and just for sheer fear not to be caught by the Germans again, went with the Russians. And actually I'm getting out completely of my train of thought. We were liberated January 27, 45. We were the very first ones. Thank God. Another week I couldn't have made it. I was liberated. The crematoriums did not work. I will come back if we have time later how I got back to Birkenau. Did not work in the last couple of weeks. And when they evacuated the camp, I didn't go. I couldn't get back to the barracks neither because they took every Jew, they said, every Jew without exception is to get up to the march, which were the death marches, the famous death marches. I didn't go. I couldn't get back to the barracks because the Polacks and Ukrainians didn't let us in. I mean, I don't know whether there were many others, but they didn't let me in. The only place I could hide was among the dead bodies which were accumulated in the last couple of weeks, because the Germans had blown up. Not even a couple of weeks, just about less than a week. I was hiding in these dead bodies. And we were liberated by the Russians Saturday night, January 27th. I mean to show you that how my Jewish background and coming from an Orthodox home gave me a sense of survival and feeling for it. And like Shabbos night when the Russians came in, the first word we said, a few others with me, like Hidim Hoyso Eure V'Simchov, to the Jews was light and joy and gladness. You know, between the dead bodies, and here we have the Russians come in, and this gave obviously like a blood transfusion. And I joined the Russians because I could speak Russian, but they didn't want me along with them. I was a walking skeleton. And even then we had a problem for the simple reason because there were Germans who put up some refugees to the Russians to say that they are anti-German whatever, but they were having a mission to bring back information to the Germans or even to detonate something somewhere. So my good luck was that there was a General Tarasov, I think. And I came to him and he spoke Yiddish. and number of proofs that I'm Jewish. This is why he accepted me, so that he took all the self-pity. I was a kid. I mean, I weighed 83 pounds. Was more dead than alive. But I got immediately from a dead of the body of a dead soldier his coat, and the important things were the shoes, because I had frozen fingers. And that Monday, but I could read the Russian map. This was very important. I could read the map. I could speak a little Russian, so I was some little value to them. We came Monday afternoon into a Polish town, maybe only about 30 miles from, not 30, but 30 kilometers from Birkenau. And usually at noontime with nice sun, we rested in little hamlets on the wall of the houses. Suddenly, there was raining hand grenades, hot lead and everything, big nails from the rooftops. And one of the Russians who got killed near me, I took his machine gun. The first time in my life I held a gun in my hands. From that Monday till Friday afternoon I went berserk. Every guy uniform, Pole or German, inside I shot. I was stealing ammunition from the other soldiers. Friday afternoon there was a very old man from Bratislava. He was a Weichhausfuhrer, a Jewish bookstore seller, who said, you know, even a murderer stops on the seventh day. It's Shabbos today. I mean, as far as your question is what I did, I was not probably totally fully aware of all this, but I did my share to destroy as many Germans as I could. I don't know, you were sidetracked. I was telling you something else. You were asking me something else.
That's okay. I wanted to ask you about the tattoo that you've kept on your arm. What does it mean to you to have that there still?
You know, I tell you, I don't live with it every day. But only yesterday, on television, Hot Seat, there was Irvin Rubin with Tom Metzger, the chief dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. He said in front of millions of viewers, it never happened, it's just a hoax. It's hard to believe. So, if this helps us as a little reminder to myself and to others, I think I wouldn't think of removing it. I was asked to remove it. Matter of fact, the first time I was asked to remove it by very dear Swiss friends, Gentile friends, why should you be reminded? I said, I didn't want to be so culturally cleansing that Santaya says if you don't remember history, it's bound to repeat itself. It's not something that I am ashamed of. The world is to be ashamed of that, not me. Mm-hmm. I have no problem with it. I have no problem with it. And I think it is, I know some Mexicans who always ask me to show it to their friends because they want them to know that it could happen to them as well. So I don't think of removing it. I'm not ashamed of it. And I don't ever hide it. I don't go around neither saying, hey, do you know what this is? No. It's a fact that happened, which is never to happen again. And it has to be, I want it to be remembered. Myself, I want to be remembered. Yes.
You've remained an Orthodox Jew.
Yes.
And I'm very interested in that because many of the people that we interview are not. Can you talk a little about that?
You know, I have difficulty in I tell stories long. I have difficulty to make it short, but I guess it's not a forum where I have, after the war, first of all, I came to a museum which the Germans kept for Red Cross purposes. I came in there, in this museum there were very valuable things, gold, silver, diamond. And I knew that, or I believed that the whole evil started because the Gentile world, the primitive Europe, wanted to have the Jewish wells. They killed the Jews. So I said, am I going to start out with gold and silver, diamonds, and being afraid that I'm haunted by Polacks and Ukrainians? I took tefillin. And it gave me a tremendous amount of comfort. Matter of fact, the tefillin was so important that in the camps, we were just like blind horses. There was one pair of tefillin. There were 7,800 inmates. I don't know how he got there. But there were people who were willing to risk their lives to get a chance to put on the tefillin. So tefillin was for me an identity and with life. I took it. Don't think that there were not times when I have questioned God killing my parents. On the other hand, I said, okay, what idea did I have to survive, and why not the other person? So to bring a little order in my life, I have chosen. I've seen some of my friends married non-Jewish girls. Their life became hell over again. So I knew that to have order in my life, I couldn't find anything better, and I threw myself into studies. I accumulated the sum of 11 languages. I studied what you can imagine. I could. From music to science and then to comparative religion, everything. And then I found that for me, the best guidance, the best foundation, the most strength came from Judaism. And this is what I have followed. And I see now as well, as an Orthodox Jew, no matter where I travel, I will always find another Jew who will help me, because it's easier to identify me as a Jew when I'm Orthodox than if I'm not. Mm-hmm. So I traveled all over the world. I traveled over 90 countries. And as an Orthodox Jew, I found much more fulfillment in it. Sharing, giving and taking. And the fact that I'm here today is a Jewish obligation. And to me it is because I'm a practicing Jew. I meet with Almighty and with other Jews every day of my life. In my business ethics, I also have to be better because I'm an Orthodox Jew. I'm not afraid to wear my kippah in court, in the street, in business, everywhere. Of course, I can attribute that to my wife, whom I remarried 2.5 years ago. She herself was fortunate to survive with her mother and her brother. She was only 2.5. She was in Theresienstadt, though with her brother. And so I feel a great deal of strength. Gives me guidance, gives me a direction. I'm somewhat less confused than without it. Mm-hmm. This is what it means. And as a Jew, I will rather at this point give away the $250 or $300 than to buy myself a new suit. I don't need a new suit.
Let's stop now while we change the tape.
Earlier we got sidetracked with a question about one would have to go after that on the stomach to crawl out the coal. All the coal mines have little rails, and in normal coal mines there are water pumps to pump the water, because every coal mine has water, but there were no water. And what do they care for us to be the water? As a matter of fact, I had always to dig a ditch to stand in the hall, not to break my back. This is why I have very bad shoes. You see that I'm wearing special shoes. And I broke that drill. But just because, the shoes what we had was nothing but a plank of wood with a piece of tarpaulin which was tearing off the first day you got it or the second. So, not seeing, was wet, I tripped into the rail or in a piece of coal, and bingo, the drill broke in half. This was sabotage, enough to be killed. But the man who would have the authority to kill the German, he has taken off to some celebration. So I was back in the camp, I just gave my number, and tomorrow is going to be my good day. But I maneuvered around that I was ending up in infirmary. I ended up in infirmary, and just for a short while. And then they had the numbers. Even in that confused all 50 different commandos we were working at, the Germans had a very good system. They knew everything. My number was caught up, and I was taken from the camp with the dead bodies. And Musliman meant, see, they had such disregard for the Arabs that they called them Musliman, skinny, despised skin and bone bodies. The Germans hated the Arabs, just like they hated the blacks. They were called a Musliman. A Muslim means a Musliman. And if the Musliman is skinny, you had no existence, you were sent to be burned. In this particular instance, and by the way, the man who enabled me to end up in infirmary was Dr. Korn. He somewhat risked his life to help me into the infirmary. And then they took all the dead bodies and those so-called Muslimen, and a few were not fully Muslimen, and they commanded to get on the truck. There were about 40, 50 bodies, dead bodies on the truck, about 20 live bodies. And in the cabin, the driver cabin, there were 4. I really never know the difference at exactly which functions had the SS, which were the Gestapo. I do know that SS, they had the SS, which mark, and the Gestapo had the death mark. And they're in the car looking back so that we criminals don't disappear. It was Shabbos afternoon. We left the camp in good daytime, started getting darker. And one of the men of the live one, it says, yeah, by the way, most of us had our daily ration. And he says, Jeden, es ist Zeit zu machen Schlischides. So people listened. I really don't know how much they comprehended. He says, no, the Tilas Yadayim, pretend that we're washing our hands. And those who did not have ration was given a moitzi, like it used to be at this man's Rebbe's table. And we started to sing. Matter of fact, sometimes I sing the melody. And this is how major she is. Now, I tell you, it is unbelievable what this little scenario did, what it did to me. I knew somehow. So I didn't even think, but I'm not going to be gassed with this, for we are sent to be gassed. Come to Birkenau, back from my camp where I started out originally upon my arrival. And there, we are taken to the lousy station. The only time when our name was appearing, when the card system was moved from one operation to another. And here is, we are here, the 20 or what, live bodies, going through the lousy system. I could never understand why they went through the whole procedure. But this is German systematic order. And that is my name. And the camp doctor, the Jewish doctor, this was his function, was if he had to examine or to touch, because the German doctor would never do that. Also, they always had fine white gloves. He reads the name, the hometown, and then he somewhat wanted to identify that I'm the one from that family. And we were sent really into a waiting barrack for being gassed on Monday, because Sunday the gas chambers were not working and the Russians were fairly close. And I think all but one of the gas chambers still functioned. Only later did I find out his name. This Professor Epstein, at the risk of his life, came at 2 or 2:30 or 3 in the morning to the barrack, asking for me to tell me tomorrow morning or this morning, I should go to a commando, which means to a work attachment, and get out of this barrack. Yeah, there was no need to talk a lot, because codes, we were very good in codes. So I said, can I tell some of my others if they are capable of going in? Of course, because there were some who were literally dead, which we had to haul back into from the delousing station. So a few of us actually escaped out of this barrack. I mean, we would have had to come out anyway to be counted for total count. We went to work. This man has really risked his life for me. Interesting enough, thank God he survived. I went to visit him in Prague. He was, by the way, the top pediatric professor in all of Czechoslovakia. I said, Professor, tell me please, why did you risk your life? He said, you see, I was already in my early 50s. My life was through. But you had still a way to go. And I said, from the family you came, I felt that you have something to accomplish. Get the best care. I don't neglect myself. And it was my duty to come to him every so often to report my well-being. You said, in the camps, you know, they were, I'm always asked, and usually I'm asked by people who are cynical. I say, you know, you let yourself being driven into the cattle cars. I mean, didn't you resist? I was asked that by our ambassador in Vietnam, Mr. Ambassador Nolte. Strange enough, day before Independence Day in Vietnam, in his residence, he says to me, why didn't you resist? I said, Mr. Ambassador, how much resistance do I see by our army? Resist. I told him the one story, that we were in a small working commando of 4, 3 kids and then one old man. He was 40, in his 40s or late 30s. But this was considered a man of 200 years old. He always used to say, I can't take it anymore. I don't have this energy. He said, no, don't. You'll get back to camp. You'll rest up a little bit and feel better. He really was exhausted. Everybody was exhausted. I mean, you could, if you decided to lie down, you could never get up. And one day, his ration was stolen or disappeared. And obviously this was for him enough of a permission, us to agree, or to us to give us permission to agree that he should not continue. So no. The 3 of us went out of our little lousy, meager ration of bread, which was mixed in with sawdust. We gave of that 1/3 of our ration for him not to give up. These were the things. I mean, you know, they were also attempts of digging of tunnels. These were all stupid things. Where could we go? Because we were surrounded. This is why the camps were built in Poland, because they were all a population of murderers. Where could we have gone? There was a lot. A lot was done of that. It's unbelievable. You asked to describe a day in camp. I mean, I tell you, if I would be the greatest writer, I couldn't possibly describe it, not only for anybody to understand, but for me itself to comprehend that it has happened. You know, look, I mean, you know, I was probably one of the most courageous guys ever. I mean, heroism, I can't tell you another one. When my brother came back from work camp, the day when I was taken away on the death truck, I was told that he was making an attempt to see to be another truck, because if he's there, he could possibly save me. Can you imagine anything like that? And he did not have helicopters to protect him or anything. I mean, the work itself in the camp was, I mean, the fact was that we, as longer we went on, was more exhaustion. But I was very lucky. When I was taken on that death truck to Birkenau was my only chance I had, actually accidentally, the chance to survive. Because, as you no doubt must know, what took place in the camps just the following weeks. They were marched on the death march. This death march, where I lost both of my brothers. We lost in the camps, I would say, from the beginning till that time, 40-50% from exhaustion, even from other causes. But the death march took care of the rest of them. They're marching, by the way, there in January, February, March, is so cold that it's undescribable. And we did not get any extra clothes for winter. And this death march have taken place on foot. And they're going on for hundreds of miles. And the death marches were used for protection of the German armies from the oncoming Russian army, later the British army, the English army. And I know of things happening where, actually what happened in the death march, that when somebody fell and he couldn't get up immediately to continue the march, he was just shot. Where they were many in thousands, where they were carrying a third person, by that diminishing their own chance of survival. This happened constantly. And to describe the workload, yes, the best way to describe perhaps what happened at the coal mine. Jerry Lewis, who was, not Jerry Lewis, I wish it would be Jerry, but Joe Lewis, who was the president of the Coal Miners Union, the Coal Mine Union made a study that in one 24 working period, there was more energy. I don't know exactly what scientific method they used describing it. Was more energy expended than in an American coal miner, which is a pretty rough life, in a 7-day period. I think that this tells it all. Speaking of coal mines, and I was working on a railroad construction commando in the summer. The heat was burning us to death. Many did die from sunstrokes. So we had to carry, I have just noticed it last week on my trip, and I thought that they were fixing railroad there. So I stopped to ask the guys, how long is this piece of railroad? They said 32 feet. And how many people are carrying it? It says by rule, has to be 4 of us, so that nobody is going to exert himself. We must have carried twice as long one, just 2. Twice as long one, 2. Describing the load of work. They were building in the camp. We were a big electric generating plant. They were priding that one of the highest chimneys of the decade or the century, or hell knows what it was. And first of all, to get up, it was every day getting a little bit higher. The German foreman, you build houses, they have scaffolding. There's scaffolding around. There were 3-4 stages of scaffolding, but mostly the work was always concentrated on the top. Just by the time you got there, you were already plenty exhausted. And work was very hard. And many people just from heights fell over the scaffolding and died. True, they did not want to see people to bail out or die so fast, because it was very fine work. Every bit of that material which was used was very costly. I remember once a fellow accidentally threw over one. He was beaten to death because a piece of that, of the ceramic or whatever it is, was so valuable. And the workload was inhuman. Our take, I mean, this was I did in the first few weeks. The cement bags, by American law, before OSHA came in existence, there was not allowed to be anything packed more than 100 pounders. So they reduced it to 80. Then they had 100 kilos, which is 224 pounds. And this we were carrying on our backs. The Germans were like dogs, and up on gangplanks, which I don't know, the incline could have been 45, 60 degrees. So the work itself was, but this was really somehow the least bothersome, but just the treatment, how they were working towards destroying our morale, our thinking, our everything. And I don't know. I'm not good enough to give it a good description. But if you have anything that you in particular want to ask.
I was wondering whether you have any memories of holidays celebrated in the camp.
Yes, I can tell you one in particular. We were working in a commando, actually at this chimney building commando. There was an elderly rabbi. Again, I don't know how old he was. I mean, to me, he was an old man. And he said to us, my brother was also working in that particular commando, and he said to us, if I would not have to Machilol Yom Kippur, to segregate the Yom Kippur, he says, why would it be to me? He was just talking to himself, more or less. I went to the camp doctor, the one who admitted me after the breaking of the, but this was several months before. I said, Dr. Eric, if you could enable the old rabbi, he was known actually in the camp because he was a very, came from a great rabbinic dynasty, to help the rabbi not to have to work Yom Kippur, I tell you would be coming out of camp alive. He should have spit in my face and kicked in my ass and said, you're crazy. I didn't know. I mean, no, you didn't think always what is going to be the outcome. So he says to me, did the old rabbi tell you? I said, no. He said, well, I tell you. He was an assimilated Jew from Prague, being a doctor. And he said, this was the procedure to do. You took some old exhausted oil which was brought back from the working commando, which could not be used for anything, but it was used only for oiling the floor in the camp, so that the dust does not eat us up faster. He took 2-3 spoons of that. He had a heavy case of diarrhea, and with him. So I said, but you tried to stay with him in the infirmary. I did, and we ended up in the infirmary. The bed was not wider than this here, both in the same bed, because we both had the same symptoms, and a semblance of a blanket he put part on his head and my head, and he was saying the prayers with me from beginning to the end. At one point he says to me, no, say it very clearly, because we have to daven for Claudius Struel. I remember when we were finished, he put his hand on me, and he says, it's truth of this, I will come out, and I will tell others of the wonders of Almighty. That night his son came to the window. He was very bitter. And he says, son, don't be bitter. He says, he davened for all of us. You say to celebrate. I mean, like I can tell you only Hanukkah. When I told you when the bodies were burned by the Germans because of the Polak who disappeared, we went and we took pieces of cloth put together and make Hanukkah candlelights in the camps. Where the Polish capos told the Gestapo that they would probably make a celebration. We did this to say the bracha. And I mean, this is what bothers me today, that we risk our lives to put on that film today. It is possible to do it, and we do little about it. But there is something. No, there were things of that nature. I mean, unbelievable celebration. That was really, matter of fact, most of the time we did not even know when the Shabbos was. No, but there were people who maneuvered around, and there was no celebration of holiday. But I mean, this is Hanukkah. This is the same night. Can you imagine? Go take with rags and soak it in the dirty oil to burn it for a minute, so that we should say the bracha. And then it was a great deal of course, there were also a lot of dreaming and planning to escape. There was not such a chance, not in that bloodthirsty soil of Poland, because the camp was in the middle of the population centers. You know, look, this is why the uniform was blue and white. So it could be seen at night, it could be seen at daytime. And where could we go? And which Polak would want to help a Jew? It was impossible. But there were many things, even in our camp, there were things which we found out later. But they're futile. They're futile. But only one thing I can tell you, and I've said it over again, would we have known the stories of the Khmelnytskys, or would there have been Meir Kahanis in the 40s, 42s, half of the population, Jewish population, would not have been heard of. It is not after the fact. I have talked to the few survivors, and I asked them, I know myself, we knew how to make Molotov cocktails. And I've asked the same doctor who my parents made him a doctor, he didn't do a thing. He says, why didn't you do something? He said, because you bastard didn't help us. You know, if there would have been Mark Kehanis or Irving Rubins or other crazy guys like that, we would have done something, and then the Christian world would have realized that they're not helpless. And then not even the Aarons would have accused of being taken like sheep to the slaughter. I mean, you know, when you think of that taken out of the ghetto after the dehumanizing process, sleeping on floors, little bundles, with a gendarmerie and the dogs and the Gestapo watching, what could we do? But would we have done something? I assure you. I mean, would have been, but we did not know, we didn't believe, we didn't think it possible.
We have to stop now. I'm awfully sorry, but I think that in a way it's good to end it with your message. Thank you.